Farmers LLC, and I've had a lifelong journey to help salespeople and sales managers realize their potential. And if I had to say, what's the one thing that keeps people from realizing their potential? And I think it goes back to a word of wisdom my sales manager said to me many, many years ago before many of you were born. And he asked me one time, we're doing an account review, and he says, Mike, have you earned the right for this sale? And I went back and I realized I probably had not. I knew the customer, I knew the opportunity. I certainly wanted the sale, knew who the competition was, but I hadn't earned the right. And so ever since then, I've been on a mission to make sure we have earned the right. Do we understand the customer needs? Do we understand the issues? Do we understand the competition? Do we understand all the various facets that go into winning an opportunity in an account? And if you've earned that right, you win a very high percentage. So with that, Phil, let's rock.
Wow. Earning the right. That's interesting. I think some sales folks feel entitled, right? Like, hey, I'm here, you're here, let's go, right? I'm here. That's enough. That's not enough, Mike?
Well, it's interesting how the guy did it, because actually what he did, Phil, was actually a great sales management coaching technique. And I can replay this conversation that happened decades ago. The guy's name was Ron Cobb, and he brings me in. I was a new sales rep selling office automation in Florida. And he comes in and says, Mike, how's it going? I said, great. He said, how's your funnel look? I said, looks really good. He says, well, tell me about an opportunity. And I said, well, I got this account. They're in Hollywood, Florida. They're X amount of people, and I think they're ready to go. And he says, who's your competition? I said, well, I don't really know, but I know they're interested. And he said, what applications have you uncovered? And I said, well, I know they're interested in buying. They told me. He said, what issues have you uncovered? What are the driving forces within the organization? He says, what are their organizational priorities? I said, I don't know. He says, Mike, do you think you've earned the right to win this sale? And I said, I don't think I have. He says, well, what are you going to do about it? And so I said, well, I'm going to go back in and do it. But what's the point, Phil? He didn't lecture me. He didn't wag his finger at me. He didn't do anything. He just asked questions. And that's the Socratic method of just uncovering a great sales management technique. How's it going? What are you doing? How's it working? What kind of applications have you uncovered? Who are the people, et cetera? And you ask those questions, oftentimes you'll find a generic, as you know, a generic answer, and you have not earned the right. And so ever since then, I've vowed, not only when I do work myself, but when I work with other people, to make sure we have earned the right, that we have a solid solution for the customer. They love it. We understand and many times we know their application better than they do. I've gone into many locations and asked questions. And this happened at the Charlotte Observer down in Charlotte, North Carolina. We go in, we gave him 3 pages of notes of problems he was totally unaware of, the IT man. And that resulted over time in a $15 million sale. But we earned the right for that. We spent 2 days on site digging. So anyway, don't want to go on a rant, but I'm just a huge believer in earning the right, doing your due diligence, offering customer value, and then reaping the rewards.
Wow. So that's pretty hardcore discovery. So 2 days on site. Talk to me about that level of discovery, because a lot of inside sales reps now, they ask 1 or 2 questions, they uncover, oh yeah, it's a manual process, or oh yeah, we're not currently doing that, and they think that's enough. So talk to me about the depth of discovery that you were talking about there.
Well, first of all, it's a great question, and I I had a sales rep. He was a great guy. So let me set the stage for you, Phil, to explain how this happened. And this is maybe, I don't know, this is 20 years ago, so it's a while back. But this, his name was Jeff Davis, and he had this account, the Charlotte Observer, while he was working at Lucent Technologies. And he was best friends with a decision maker. They used to ride Goldwing motorcycles together. They were Eagle Scout leaders, so you can't get a tighter relationship with a decision maker than he did. And he says, Mike, I got this opportunity. And he says, by the way, the parent organization, Knight Ridder Publications, is going to be doing a technology refresh across the country. And my friend Phil Drake is going to be in charge of the whole project. I said, wow, this is fantastic. I said, we really need to go in and outwork, outthink, outsell the competition. He says, Mike, you don't need to do that. He says, I'm friends with Phil. I've got it nailed. So he didn't want me to go in. It was his account. Some salespeople are like that. Stay away. He was maybe afraid I'd ask the wrong questions, or maybe I'd offend somebody. These were his friends. And I said, I want to go in there, and I want to see for myself. I want to uncover things perhaps the customers themselves is not aware of. He says, no, Mike, I got it covered. I said, we're going to go in and do a discovery. He says, but a high executive like yourself, it wouldn't look right. I said, no, tell the customer that they're so important. Even a high executive is going to want to come in and see for himself. So he said, we finally said, okay, fine. So we spent a day and a half there, and we spent a half day in the newsroom, a half day in the classified advertising, and a half day in the circulation desk. And we found out so many things about that account. In fact, I was ashamed to have that as one of our accounts. We had done such a horrible job. The biggest issue they had, they said, well, we're playing phone tag. Somebody calls in with a lead to a reporter, they call back, they get voicemail, they call back, get voicemail. I say, why don't you do one number reach? It rings everything. It rings your cell phone, your desk phone, your boat phone, your sky phone. It rings everything. He says, well, that'd be great. They'd had that feature for 10 years, didn't even know they had it. So, I mean, we uncovered really corporate malpractice on my own company's part. And I was so ashamed of the poor service we'd done over the years. But of course, I couldn't say that to the customer. But I went to Jeff and said, Jeff, we've got to correct this. This is negligence on our part. And he'd been such buddies with the decision maker. He'd been asleep at the switch for what's going on in the ground. So that's the value, Phil, of ground level work. And we just went to every department and we said, what do you like? If you had a magic wand, what would you do? If you could make a change, what would it be? And we uncovered so many. We had 3 pages of money saving ideas and ROI. So I don't want to take the whole session here to tell the story, but we earned the right for that sale. And when we flew to Denver for an executive briefing, we went through all of this. We asked at the end, how'd it go? He says, you guys nailed it. And our big competition at that time was Cisco. And we said, how'd that go? And they said, well, we're going to bring them back. And we said, well, how come you're bringing Cisco back and you're not bringing us back? And they said, they did such a terrible job. All they did was talk to us about things that we didn't care about. And our CEO said, they can't possibly be that bad. So we're bringing them back. But needless to say, we ended up with the sale anyway. So what's the so what to this? I always say, just like Survivor, outwork, outthink, outplay, outwit, outsell the competition by outworking them in the trenches. So that's Mike's sermon.
Wow. I love that. I love that level of discovery. I mean, that's far deeper than most go. But you're solving problems now that are worth being solved, as opposed to surface level problems. I want to uncover $10 million problems, not $10 problems.
Exactly.
That's gold. So with that, Mike, that's not why you came. Why we're talking today. You want to talk. You said, Phil, there's a difference between the best and the most profitable salespeople. You told me that. So tell me what the difference is between the best and the most profitable. Tell me that story that you shared with me in the green room.
All right. Well, thank you, Phil. But I think that's kind of an illustration there. The sales rep I had, and again, he was a really good guy. He was diligent. He'd been in the business a long time. He cared about his customers. But the difference between good and great, I think Bill Gates said one time, a great programmer is worth 10,000 good ones. 10,000 to 1. I think that's an exaggeration in the sales field, but I would take one A+ player over 100 B players. So what's the difference between the A+? And so the story I was sharing with you yesterday, I was called into an office in New Jersey, and the woman who was the sales leader said, Mike, we want you to come in and do a training for us. I said, okay, what do you need? Well, she says, my guys are kind of order takers. They're really good. They're friendly. They're personable. Customers love them, but they're order takers. So I said, okay. So I do my usual due diligence. I earned the right. I said, who are the people? What did they sell? Well, the top guy there had sold $11 million in gross profit, probably 60 or 70 million top line revenue. His big account was a Barclays bank, so a huge bank. And I thought to myself, 11 million gross profit, he earned over $2 million. And I said, what can Mike Schmidtman possibly teach a guy to sell like that? And she says, well, believe it or not, he's a really nice guy, but he's not a very good salesperson. I thought that's kind of odd. And then a little bit later on, they had an opportunity to bid on the Barclays Arena in Brooklyn, which is and so there was a big bid. It was network infrastructure, digital signage, Wi-Fi networks, security, everything, millions and millions of dollars. And I said, well, you're going to give it to Kevin, right? He's your top guy. She says, oh, I'd never give it to Kevin. I said, why not? He's not one of my best reps. So here's a guy earning $2 million a year, and he's not one of the best reps. And so, Phil, it really struck me, and I'm sure you've had times like this in yourself. You say, that's kind of an unusual thing. So when I would visit companies, I would ask the question, who's your best salesperson and who's your most successful? And they were often not the same person. And I thought, that's interesting. How come your most successful person is not your best? And how come your best is not the most successful? So ever since then, I've been kind of on that journey to figure that out. And so in my travels, again, I work in a high-tech field, information technology. So network infrastructure, computers, telephone systems, security systems, et cetera. Anything kind of IT related I work with. And as you can appreciate, there's big dollars there. If you get a big account, they can buy a lot of stuff, servers, routers, phones, computers, whatever. So we're in a business that scales really well. If you get a big account and they like you, they can buy lots and lots of stuff. And it's so in my travels, I've probably run across maybe a dozen salespeople who earn 7 figures. And I always ask the same question. Who are you? What do you do? What makes you different, et cetera? And very interestingly, they're not the best salespeople that I've met. Matter of fact, that training I was telling you about up in New Jersey, we did some role plays, and they had maybe 10 salespeople in the room. And when it came time to role plays, that $11 million gross profit, $2 million income guy turned into a bag of nerves. He was all jittery and fidgety. It couldn't put sentences together. So it's interesting. He wasn't one of their best salespeople. You'd never put him in front of a room to present. And yet he was good at what he did. So I don't want to diminish in any way his wonderfulness. He just, from a skills perspective, he wasn't that good. He couldn't present. He couldn't do objection handling, couldn't qualify. But he had big accounts that liked him. So I don't know. What are your thoughts, comments on that?
That's interesting, right? So few sales skills, but clearly good relationship skills.
Yeah.
But we worried. I've worried. We get too much relationship building and not enough relationship selling, right? Not enough moving the deal forward. So did this guy? Was he still able to move the deal forward, or was he just nice?
Well, that's a good question. He obviously had to have some skills. And of course, you're familiar with the book, The Challenger Sale. And the Challenger Sale had one of the 5 types was a relationship rep. And they've rated the relationship reps very low in terms of ability to get new business. So that's true. They do have to be assertive. Yes, high relationship skills, but they have to be able to move it. And you're exactly right. These big things can get stuck really easily, especially in procurement. Or if you have a board approval. So you've got to be able to push them through. But what's interesting is oftentimes the people who are the best talkers, the best presenters, are not the best salespeople. So go figure.
Yeah. Well, often I would argue, that it's the best listener, the person who hears the most, right? And tunes in and really hears what's being said. I mean, those second and third and fourth level questions are usually what wins deals, because that's where the real pain is. That's where the real problem is. That's where you uncover the real need. I mean, because initially, I mean, it's great to be liked. Don't
Mhm.
misunderstand me. If you're a jackass, you're not going to sell either. But
Yeah.
at the same time, there comes a point where being nice isn't enough. I always say I'm very kind. I'm not necessarily nice, meaning I'm going to tell you if you got broccoli in your teeth, but I'm going to do it in a polite way. I'm not going to say, "Hey, Mike, have you seen your teeth, dude? Come on." No, I'm going to say, "Hey, Mike, by the way,
Mhm.
I care about you, and therefore I want you to know that you have broccoli in your teeth." Right. And I think I think that's super interesting. So is
Mhm.
listening one of the top habits of $1 million salesmen, or what? Talk to me. Give me one or two of those habits and let's go on those.
Um, well, I'm actually going to reframe your question. It can be. First of all, that's a very, Phil, you're very observant when you kind of have these conversations, and you're an excellent listener. Um, and so here's what I would say. I'm going to reposition the metaphor for you. I would say every great salesperson I've met. Again, I try to categorize them because I get hired a lot by companies to help me hire great salespeople. And we're all looking for that ideal prototype. And I think what I found is it doesn't exist. What does exist is what I call a three-legged stool, and everyone is missing one of the legs. So that's the metaphor because I've found, and I'd be very interested, Phil, in your perspective on this. But when I generalize and say, a lot of people say, well, salespeople are extroverted, except the ones that aren't. Um, some people have high degrees of technical skill, except the ones that don't. Some people are very relationship oriented, except the ones who are lone wolves. So for every stereotype you can list, I can list you the opposite and find somebody who does it. So what's the real metaphor? And the metaphor is they have a superpower. Um, but with every superpower, you have an Achilles heel. So that's the three-legged stool. You're going to be really good at something. That's the superpower. But what you have to do as a leader is to compensate for. So let me give you some examples. When I was running my office, so I had a sales organization with 15 salespeople in Northern Virginia back, about 20 years ago. And I had three top people. They each did a couple $1 million in gross profit. They probably earned $500,000 a year 20 years ago. That was a lot of hay, still is. Um, One of them was a great hunter, kicked down doors, really sharp product knowledge, et cetera. His organizational skills were awful. He couldn't remember a phone number. He couldn't show up to a meeting on time. He almost needed a full-time personal assistant just to make sure he showed up. He would give proposals, Phil, and lose them. And the customer would come back and say, I'm ready to buy. And he'd have to have the customer send him his own proposal because he'd lost it. So that's how disorganized he was. So what was his superpower? He was like a hammerhead. He could get into any account. He was really good. His product knowledge was great, but his organizational skills were awful. Now, I had a second person. This is a woman, and she was the best account manager I'd ever had. And she used to run, one of our accounts was Booz Allen Hamilton, and she would run the strategy meetings for a big consulting company. She was that good. Here's your 5-year roadmap. Here's what you're going to do. And you talk about assertive. She was telling senior executives, you are going to do this, and you're going to do this. And Becky, when are you going to have this done? And Craig would, she would run the meeting. But her Achilles heel was she couldn't open a new account. Couldn't. If I put her at 99% of the companies in this country in an open territory, she'd fail 99% of the time. So what I would do is I would get a foot in the door, bring Teresa in, and the rest was history. She'd take care of it. So she couldn't open an account, but she could really manage it well. So you see already there's two stereotypes. There's the opener, there's the brilliant account manager, and I had a third type too. This was a guy who was a great relationship person. He'd go into a bar and come out with a lead. He was everybody's best friend. He was great, but his technical skill was very poor. He did, and being a technology field, that's kind of a limiting factor, right? You can't do a demo, you can't talk
Yeah.
technology. So I teamed him with a guy who was great technical but wasn't a good opener. So I put him as a team. So my point is, every top person, everyone, has a superpower somewhere. There's not just one superpower or two or three, there's 5, 10, 15. They can be great in relationships. They're great at working vendors. They may be great at networking. They may be strategic. They may be charismatic. They may be funny. They may be whatever. They've got a superpower, but every time you have a superpower, you're going to have a corresponding weakness somewhere else. It almost comes. I've never seen anybody who had the whole game. I mean, Michael Jordan could do everything, but he was Michael Jordan. Most
Yeah.
people I know aren't Michael Jordan. So my job as a manager was to compensate for whatever weakness that person had, to put them in a position. So you might say, like playing chess, put my people in a position where they could do what they did best as well as they could, and then compensate for what they did badly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally does. Totally does. So we figure out their weakness, right? We
Mm-hmm.
put them in positions to win, and then
Yep.
we compensate, or we kind of,
Mm-hmm.
go shade over that so that we've got a Venn diagram, so that we've got a team that
Yep.
can sell. And that makes, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, basketball, any metaphor that you want there,
Mm-hmm.
nobody's good at everything.
Yeah.
That's just, or I shouldn't say that. Nobody's great at everything. People can be good, but they're not great, right? They're not 8 or 9 or 10 at 10 things.
Well,
They've
I
got to
mean,
be.
William Shakespeare couldn't spell his own name. They've got like 10 signatures and he spells his name differently. So William Shakespeare, the greatest English writer who ever existed, couldn't spell. So that obviously didn't limit his effectiveness, but I'm sure he had an editor that cleaned up his spelling.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting, though. Putting them in a position to win is something that many sales leaders don't do. They often think that it's one size fits all. Here's
Right.
how we go here, right? We've got Lucas over here who's great at, to your point, opening accounts. We've got
Mm-hmm.
Sandy over here who's terrible at opening new accounts. Why don't we team them up and
Yeah.
find ways for them to grow, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's
Yep.
because that's the ultimate goal. The whole organization needs to grow. It's not about Lucas or Sandy. It's about that whole organization.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yep.
So how do we do that, Mike? How do we figure out their weaknesses? I mean, is it just observation? How long does that take? I mean, is there a way to speed that up, or what do you think?
That's a great question, Phil. And I can't say I know the answer. I just think I did a lot of trial and error. I've always liked to work teams of people. But some salespeople don't work well in teams. So I would tinker. I would try things. And I don't claim to, but it's like in baseball. If you get 1 hit out of 3 at bats, you're a good player. I don't claim everything I ever did was a success, but I tinkered a lot and I tried things and I kept trying to stir the pot. And whenever I could, I would put teams of people together. So the skills of various people would complement each other in a way that was optimal for the customer and for the company and for them, whenever possible. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, complementary skills. That makes a lot of sense, right? So with that though, I mean, what do you feel? I mean, you've been, you're still working with tons of sales teams here. What do you think is a good hit rate for your sales team? I mean, what are you expecting? I mean, you said 1 for 3 in baseball. What's the hit rate of sales reps hiring?
Yeah. Well, that's, I'll say again, interesting question, but the wrong question. So let me share with you why I say that. I sometimes think of the sales cycle, Phil, as a big math equation. So if you think of a math, you've got this many in account-based marketing, you got this many, optimal prospects. Then you have an MQL, a marketing qualified lead. So they've kind of shown some interest somewhere. Then you've got a sales qualified lead, which means they've got the budget, authority, need, et cetera. Then you got an accepted lead, which means you're going to propose on it, and then you've got a win. And then, of course, once you sell it, many times that's where the fun begins, because now you have account management, you have upselling, and you cross-sell, et cetera. And you land and expand. So it's a big math equation. So how many targets, how many convert to MQLs, how many to SQLs, boom, boom, boom. I used to think, I've actually done spreadsheets like this that had big, but to answer your question, what's the right, I've seen, I had a sales guy one time, he taught me when I was younger, and then we became colleagues. We often appear at conferences. You may have met him, Gil Cargill. And he was an IBM salesperson and trainer for years. He's a very interesting guy. And he says a salesperson who wins every one of their sales is not a salesperson, they're an order taker. I thought, no, that's pretty insightful. If you win everything, you're not a salesperson, you're an order taker. Real salespeople, and think of the reason why. If you're winning everything, you're either not venturing out of your comfort zone or you're not getting the right price that you could be. Maybe you're underselling yourself. So the optimal win rate is not 100%. It's somewhat less. But to answer your question, I mean, if you're selling skyscrapers, if you sell 1 out of 100, it's a pretty good sale. If you're selling, copiers, you might want to win 60, 70%. But I think on the average, Phil, I'd be interested in your opinion on this. I think the average is about 33%. So you win 1, you lose 1, and 1 is a no decision. Is that about what you see?
Yeah, that's about what I see. And I would say you talk about your A+ players. I think A+ is typically 1 out of 25 or 1 out of 30. We don't see many super duper stars that really are that can go anywhere. They might be super duper in their organization, but that's not transferable. They've learned the product knowledge. They've learned the organizational skills. They've learned how the organization uses the CRM. And they've built up great referral sources, or they're a great hunter. I think you need one or the other, or it'd be even better if you had both. But I don't know that a lot of people do, because often hunters will, they'll go through people instead of going with people. The selling through is really, I mean, and some people are just, they don't like that. I don't like to be sold through. I can tell you. Back when I was a VP of IT, Mike, I had sales reps that would try to sell through me and go to my boss. And I didn't even have to say anything. She would spin them right back at me. And it'd be like, Turkey, you are doing the wrong thing here. I would even tell him, I'm like, if I tell you the time is not now, I'm not lying to you. My boss has said the time is not now. Well, let me talk to her. She's never going to put you on her calendar. So you have to work with me. This is how this works. And so, percentage wise, I think you're right, though. 1 out of 3. And yeah, I don't know that it's a no decision. I think they're average that probably need extra coaching. And that I'd say we've got if we've got 5 levels, right? We've got 1 that's below. We've got 1 that's average. That's your 33%er, and 1 that's really good. That's probably at 2/3. And then every 20, 25, 30, we hit 1 superstar that probably hits, 4 out of 5.
But I think, getting back to your question was, what's the right win rate, et cetera, et cetera. I do think of it as a big math equation. Let me give you another example of how it can work in different ways. In other words, there is not an answer, there's multiple answers, but they have to lead back to what you want. So I had, at one time, we were selling telephone systems. And we could sell everything from a 5-phone system to a 5,000 phone system, et cetera. So obviously big size differences. Well, my two top salespeople were both women, and one sold, that was Teresa, who had the big, she sold a 9,000 station 4 building complex in Tyson's Corner, Virginia, $7 million. So she was a whale hunter. My second best salesperson sold Domino's pizza stores. Average sale 5,000, but she sold 800 of them, 800 Domino's pizzas. So the math was different for both of them, but they were both successful, but they took different courses. So that's what I say. It's a big math equation, and there's any input you do. So I'll give you another example. I work with an SDR now. So I work with maybe a dozen sales development people. So their job is to get appointments. And that's, as you can appreciate, that's getting harder and harder and harder. Fewer people answer the phone, fewer people answer unsolicited emails. It's harder to get people there. Well, I got one guy, and he's brute force. He talks in a monotone. He's not that technically knowledgeable. He just makes a million calls. And he set 3 appointments last week and fairly sizable opportunities just because he just brute force calls and calls. He's not his talk track isn't that compelling, but he's earnest, he's honest, he's sincere. So he's not a BS guy, and he's a good guy. He's not the most charismatic person you've ever met, but he's a hard worker, and he gets appointments. I get another guy, and he doesn't work as hard, but he's like you do. He really works LinkedIn, and he works his connections, and he offers value. He makes far fewer calls, but he gets appointments too. So anyway, multiple. So the real answer is there's multiple paths to success. Would you agree with that?
I sure would, right? There's multiple habits, but I think the hard work though is not necessarily quantity. I think it could be quality too, because working your network is just as hard
Yeah.
as it is, brute forcing it through. I think you're a lot more relevant. So to your point, I think you probably get less no's, but you still get no's.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so nobody backs.
And remember, Gil Cargo,
100,000.
if you never get a no, you're not a salesperson, you're an order taker.
Yeah, that's it. Well, and it's so interesting, right? I mean, I can tell you there were times in my career, right, that I was aiming for 100%, right? I want to bat 1,000, and I can tell you those are the times that I was the most cautious and probably had the least amount of fun, because I want to aim for something more. Like, I'm competitive. I want to win, and by that, to your point, it's nice to take an order. I like money. Commissions are good. But I want to win. Like, I want to work for it. I want to do something that's different, that somebody says, wow. And I'll tell you, I think that's the superpower, is figuring out where you wow. That's your superpower. I like to call it, that's your weird, right? Whatever is weird, that's different about you that people will remember. Could be my friend Diana writes handwritten letters to people, handwritten notes. That's her superpower. Now that we're going back to the office, that works again. But if everybody works from home, that superpower becomes an Achilles heel, to your point, because most people don't have their home address out there. But if you try, and you network through, maybe you do.
I don't know Diane, but I'm guessing she's a very, very top person, because very few people care enough or take the time to give a handwritten note. And if they do, I maybe get 6 a year max, if that. Every one of them I treasure, because I think they thought enough to take the time to do it. And that is a success trait, I think. And it shows that she cares about people, and it's really an indication of that. And since so few people do it, it really stands out, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I believe it's all about doing the thing that is the hardest will get you the best results. So the handwritten note, that's why video email is better. If we keep going down the line here, that's why I think, the whole bulk email. Oh, hey, what's the best email to send? Well, the answer is, again, to your point, you're asking the wrong question. Who's sending that email? If my mom is sending it, I'm going to open it. If Mike Schmidtman sends it to me, I'm opening that email, right? I mean, really, Mike, you don't email me very often. When you do, I'm tuned in. If mom sends it, right? If my mom texts me, she doesn't have to spell anything, and she does, by the way, but I mean, she wouldn't have to spell anything right, and I would still call her back. Some jabroni who I don't even know, right? I mean, I've got one here, I've got all the time, I get these bulk messages that are totally useless. Totally useless. I've actually got I don't, let's see. Yeah, I usually mark them as spam, so I don't even get them again, right? I don't even get them again. But they're terrible. And they think because if they add their name that it shows up as it's known, and it'll show up in my inbox. And all that you've done is you've tricked me. And now you're starting a relationship out with a lie.
Yeah.
And that's not.
I'm interested. I look at you as a real trailblazer when it comes to effectively using social media, and that's kind of why I reached back out to you, Phil. So for any listeners or whatever, Phil and I met with the National Speakers Association, maybe 10 years ago or so.
Yeah, probably 10, 12. Yep.
Like Las Vegas or something. We had an event, and it was great. And you ran it. And it was a terrific event, one of the best ones I've ever been a part of. I thought it was great. And you kind of file that away. But I'm interested, again, I'm going to learn as much from you as you are from me.
Sure.
So I'm curious what your thoughts are, kind of what we've talked about, what separates the great from the good from the average.
Well, persistence for sure. Persistence is key. You can until you get a real no, you have to keep going. I mean, Andrea Waltz and Richard Fenton's book Go for No is seminal. I recommend that to every sales rep that I ever talk to. That's number one. Second is preparation. Now, I'm not saying over preparation, but some preparation. First call might be 90 seconds. Second call, 5 or 10 minutes. Third call, you better be ready. That might take you an hour or two for that really good demo. I want quality right as you go up. So that's the preparation is it. I think resilience, being able to handle the fact that people are, they're busy. They don't have time for you. They're gonna, it's not like it used to be where you could hear the phone slam down, but that disconnect it still stings. I sure as heck don't like it, right? That still stings. I don't like those. So that's important. And then I think someone that is committed to value, and I'm going to give an example because we hear the value word a lot. Replace value with progress, and you'll know what I'm talking about. So if it progresses the prospect in their knowledge, in their problems, in the solutions that they need, in their ability to make a decision, even if it's not you, I believe that's valuable. And that could be an introduction, right? So I could say, hey, you know what? I've got some technology folks that need training. I'm going to connect them with you, Mike. That could be value. It could also be, hey, here's an article that I read in The Economist that talks about, AI. That could be valuable. Or again, on a smaller deal, it could be, hey, you know what? Here's what Sherm is saying about HR stuff, right? Because I'm working with Bamboo HR right now, and we deal with a lot of HR folks. So here's what somebody, besides what we say, because certainly, believe it or not, we might be a little biased. We believe this, right? So, although I would say our blog is pretty impartial. We don't just point back to our software. We try to help progress as well. But yeah, I think that's key. And then the other one is the whole listening thing. Good reps can listen and then restate over and over and over again, right? They do that disco. I teach no disco, no dance, no dance, no deal.
That's a good one. That's a key right there.
Thanks. Yeah. And it's so important, right? If you can't discover, you don't get to dance with me. I'm not going to, we're not going to spend more time together. Now, that being said, by time, you might still get a second appointment, but if you're not adding any value because you didn't discover anything, it's got to be relevant value, right? That's the progress thing. If I don't find anything out, and then you got to dance because now I got to say, okay, Mike, here's some value for you. Great. Now you give me some here, and now I'm going to give you some more, and you're going to give me some, and we might do, a few value exchanges a call, but the key is you got to stay in leverage there. You got to not give it all away.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to something you just said about the discovery and the disco and the dance, which I love that metaphor, by the way. But I talked to a guy, and he was selling telephone systems up in New Jersey, and he got an opportunity to propose to some urgent care clinics. So these are places that, like a minute clinic, you get something, you don't want to get a doctor's appointment, don't want to go to the hospital, somewhere in between. You want to go there and get taken care of quickly. And he says, well, Mike, what's your word of wisdom in selling an urgent clinic? I said, you're asking the wrong person. I said, I would go inside an urgent clinic and ask them, what's your biggest issue? What's your biggest problem? What's your biggest opportunity? Ask a bunch of dumb questions and, again, earn the right to it. And I said, you haven't earned the right to propose to that customer yet because you don't know enough about their issue. So he spent some time there, and he went in. I said, go in at a time they're not off the walls busy, and just ask them. And I do this for any, just about any opportunity. I want to be on the ground seeing stuff, and you see things that whatever. Anyway, he comes back and he says, the biggest thing they have is people go to these clinics because they don't want to wait. He says, if it goes 5 rings, they're hanging up and calling across the street. Sometimes these things they have 2 or 3 of these minute clinics across the street from each other, and whoever's fastest wins. So if you're going to sell a phone system, speed is the key. How do I make sure that thing gets answered by the first or second ring? How do I make sure it gets responded? How do I make sure blah, 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 blah? He focused his whole selling presentation, Phil, on speed. Everybody's got phones that ring, but he focused on what they cared about, which is how you convert all these people calling and walking in into customers. That's how you do it. Because there's zero loyalty. If Minute Clinic is busy, I'm going across the street to the 1 hour, whatever. But that's an indication of where being on the ground and asking questions gives you everything. And I recommend that for everything. So when my Domino's Pizza story, when my salesperson, Catherine, sold 800 of them, she came to me. She had been 4 or 5 months without a sale. And I loved her. I knew she had potential, but she wasn't selling anything. And she got an opportunity. She says, I knew this guy from my old company, and he invited me. He wants an auto attendant, like a $1,800 device to answer the phone. I said, don't propose an auto attendant. Go in and see what he really needs. And she says, well, he offered me to spend a weekend and learn how to be a Domino's person. And they call it, they take it, they bake it, they make it. All the things you do in a Domino's, how to make a pizza, how to take an order, how to deliver it. She went through the whole course for 2 days over a weekend, over an $1,800 opportunity. And she says, Mike, they don't need an auto attendant. That's not what they need at all. Because their issues were phones would ring off the hook, and the guys would be in the office, and they get busy. So they would call each other and put them on hold. So they would kind of zero out half the phone so they wouldn't have to deal with all these calls. And of course, if you call a pizza place that's busy, you call the next one, right? You don't care. So this guy was losing massive amounts of business, and he wasn't even aware of it. She only saw that because she was in the place, seeing him on a Saturday night when the phone's ringing off the hook. And she earned that right for those 800 Domino's pizzas by living it. And she knew more about these Domino's stores than the owners did. And you talk about objection handling, right? Right. What do they teach you? You cushion. Well, I can appreciate how you feel. And you restate it. Well, I can understand you. Your desire to save money is important in these economic times. And then bop, 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 bop. She'd grab him by the lapel and say, you dumbass, don't you know anything? But she'd earned the right to say that. She knew more about his business and product. And it's funny, that happened 20-something years ago, Phil. She's retired now, and she's living the life down in South Florida. She's still a consultant to Domino's Pizza, but not on telephones, on profitability. She was never a phone salesperson. She was a profitability salesperson who did it through phones. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
I love that story about that's another earning the right story. She did it by spending a weekend in order to make an $1,800 sale, which she eventually walked away from. But that's how you earn the right for a big one. So that's Mike's sermon.
And I think earning the right matters. I mean, that's discovery, right? That's whatever it is, right? That's being on the ground. That's really listening. That's really being present. All of that stuff. I think earning the right is an important thing. And that's what we all should strive to do as we're selling, is to earn the right to actually have the conversation that matters. That's the goal, So with that,
what if you're not a disco fan, though? I mean, what if you can't dance like me? I'm just.
If you can't dance, well, then maybe you can sing, Mike. Maybe karaoke.
Oh my God, that's even worse.
You share the mic.
Is there
the
no
microphone?
Is there no hope for me at all?
Well, you can stick to baseball metaphors, Mike. I'll use music. It's okay.
Well, I don't know if you know the guitar player and singer Leo Kottke, and he was a very good kind of acoustic guitar player, and he actually started singing one time. He had just the worst voice, and he said his voice sounded like goose farts on a muggy day, and that's kind of what the singing is like. So, but anyway, fun. I can't dance and I can't sing, but I can sell. Is that okay?
There you go. Yeah, well, that's your third leg matters more than those other two, I think, Mike. We'll go with that, right?
All right.
That's funny. Well, cool. Well, let's wrap this up, Mike. As we think about how we earn the right for a sale, how do we even get started on that? How do we get started asking those questions earnestly so that people actually will give us the opportunity to earn the right?
Yeah. Well, the whole sales process to me, Phil, is a series of small closes. So they always say, always be closing. And people misunderstand that because they think that means you're always asking for the order, which you're not. You're asking for an advance, right? So if I'm calling, I'm closing for an appointment. If I'm on an appointment, I'm closing for a discovery. If I'm in a discovery, I'm closing for a solution discussion. So I'm always closing, but I'm closing for an advance, not the sale. So step, 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 step. And earning the right to me is the step, especially when you get a customer who says, sounds great, give me a price. Having the discipline to not do that, say, I'd love to, but I need to do. So I'll give you a quick story. My first $1 million sale was to National Geographic. And I had a lead from a carrier services rep, and I go into National Geographic. They said, we got 2,200 stations. We got 4 buildings. What's your price? And Phil, I knew within 10% on the spot what the price was going to be. Because I've been in the phone business a long time. I know what 2,200 phones is going to be, 4 buildings. Okay, about $1 million, $1.1 million, something like that. But I didn't say that. I said, I need to talk to your facilities manager. Great. Can I have a price? I'd love to. I got to talk to your system administrator. Okay, great. So I talked to the system administrator. Can you give us a price? No, I need to talk to your contact center manager. Can you give us a price? Love to. I need to talk to your art department. We went again and again and again and again and again. Every time they wanted us to give a price, we said, we're not ready. We'd love to. Now, what did we end up doing? It was the price. I knew within 5 minutes what it was going to be. It was $1,050,000 was the final price, which I could have told them in the first meeting. But if I'd done it in the first meeting, I would have lost the sale. I had to earn the right by doing it. So when the time came, I had the contact center people behind me. I had the art department people behind me. I had the facilities management. I had the system administrators, all of them. I was selling each of them on promoting our solution, if that makes sense. So that's another example of earning the right.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, selling to who's in front of you is a great way to earn the right, regardless of whether or not they're ultimately your decision maker. They're still a buyer. They
Right.
still have influence. And I think that's a great lesson as we wrap this up. So lots of top habits you talk about, but they're all different. It depends on who they are. I
Yeah.
really love that, Mike. That's a great way to remind us that every salesperson is different, but they all do a good job of working. Whether it's harder, smarter, or faster, they're doing something.
And
So,
let me pay you a compliment, Phil,
yes, sir.
because you practice what you preach. What did you just say to me? The best salespeople are listeners, and they restate and they feed it back, which is exactly what you just did. You just summarized our hour of conversation. So, folks, you're watching the best right here. That's the best summary. He encapsulated it, got the core ideas, fed it back. Yes, you're a great listener, Phil.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your time today. Folks, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this and you're thinking, ooh, I need to get more Mike Schmidtman, I encourage you to do that. Go to Mike's website. Go to MikeSchmidtman.com. That's SCHMIDTMANN.com, MikeSchmidtman.com. Get to know Mike and learn from him. Learn about his top habits. Learn about how he works with IT organizations in sales to sell into that group and to make more money. Mike,
All right.
thanks, my friend. I appreciate you, buddy.
Awesome. Thank you.